Trigger warning. This podcast episode features discussions of emotional and narcissistic abuse, as well as physical abuse. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Emotional Abuse is Real. I'm your host, Sarene Leeds, and I'm so glad you're here. Before we get into today's episode, I have a few requests. First of all, please make sure you're subscribed to this podcast on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Second, please follow me on Instagram at Sarene Leeds Writes. That's SareneleedsWrites. I've left a link to my Instagram in the show notes. For those of you who have been following the Emotional Abuse is Real Facebook page, you may have noticed that I recently made the decision to close the page. I would prefer to put my time and energy into building my Instagram presence. So if you'd like to stay in touch through social media, please connect with me through my Instagram account, Sarene Leeds Writes. I am also reachable via LinkedIn. Another way to connect with me and this podcast is through my email list, which you can subscribe to by downloading my free resource, 10 Things I Learned from Getting Paid to Watch TV. This download is a collection of some of my best writing tips and tricks, all of which I learned from covering television. My email list is a great opportunity to stay up to date on my latest published articles, new podcast episodes, and to connect with me if you're a business or brand owner. Did you know that in addition to my journalism work, I'm a professional writer specializing in website and email copy? Well, now you do. And if you're in the market for someone who can make your business copy sparkle, I'd love to talk to you further. The sign-up link for my free download, 10 Things I Learned from Getting Paid to Watch TV, is available in both the show notes and on my website, SareneLeedsWrites.com. Speaking of my website, are you mulling over possibly hiring me to do some fabulous copy work? Hey, that's awesome, but don't just rely on my own self-promotion. You can find several glowing client testimonials over on SareneLeedsWrites.com as well. As for the podcast, this is your friendly reminder that if you're a listener and you'd like to share your story on Emotional Abuse is Real, please don't hesitate to reach out via Instagram or via email at hello@SareneLeedsWrites.com. Anonymous guests are always welcome. Another way you can support Emotional Abuse is Real is by heading over to Apple Podcasts and both leaving a 5-star rating and writing a review. The more reviews we get, the easier it is for people to find this podcast. Finally, please consider donating to our Buy Me a Coffee page, which I've linked in the show notes. As I've said before, this is a one-woman operation, and your donations help fund the podcast's production costs. If you can, please share this podcast with anyone who might benefit from it. I truly do believe that we are building a community of survivors with emotional abuse is real, and the more awareness we raise, the easier it will be for victims to come forward. My guest for today's episode is an emotional abuse survivor named Emily. Emily spent several years in a secretive, toxic relationship with a controlling, manipulative guy, and is only now starting to process what she experienced. Please note that Emily is a pseudonym to protect the survivor's privacy. Also, I would recommend that you listen to this episode in parts because it does run a bit long. The reason for this is this podcast was actually the first time Emily had ever opened up publicly about her abuse. I am so honored she chose Emotional Abuse is Real to tell her story. So now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Emily.
Hi, my name is Emily. I'm 22. I'm from New Jersey, and right now I'm actually living in Madrid doing a scholarship to teach English abroad.
That's wonderful. So welcome. And as I like to do, just the floor is yours. I would love to hear your emotional abuse story.
All right. So, my emotional abuse story is a little bit complicated and intertwined as they
That's
all
okay.
are.
That's okay. That's
um,
okay. These stories are what our listeners need. So don't worry about it being convoluted or intertwined or anything like that.
all right. So I'll start, I guess. My sophomore year of college. Right
Mhm,
now, I'm just a year out of college. This is my
mhm,
first year out of college.
mhm.
But my sophomore year of college, we're really still in the thick of the pandemic at that point.
Yeah.
I was doing school online, but living in um, the city where I went to university,
Mhm.
and I was actually living with a few of my friends in a house. Three of these friends were my guy friends that I had from freshman year, and one of them was my really good friend,
Mhm.
my best friend at the time, who had been my freshman year roommate.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and we had shared a room together. We lived together really well. We were very close, and we were both friends with this group of guys. And when COVID happened, our university actually announced that sophomores who are usually guaranteed housing wouldn't be guaranteed housing.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so there was this scramble on for everyone in my grade to like try to find housing,
Yeah.
um, as best as they could. And so me and my good friend, let's call her Emma, she and I were looking for, 2-bedroom apartments, which was really difficult. And then our three guy friends approached us and said that they had found a 5-bedroom house and asked if we'd like to share it. And I was very ambivalent at first.
Mhm.
I really liked them, but I also was like hesitant because I was like, oh, they're going to be in our business.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like they're boys, they might be like gross. And, I didn't know if I wanted to live with them, but my friend was like, no, it'll be fun. We'll hang out with them all the time. And I was like, you know what? You're right. It'll be great. So we moved in.
Mhm.
The first semester in the fall was difficult for me because I had actually become involved with one of them,
Mhm.
which ironically, this story is not about this person. Although that person, I think, set me up really well for what was about to happen during my
Sure.
second semester. I sometimes wonder if it hadn't been for this one guy, that this other guy would have been able to capitalize on
Yeah.
my vulnerability,
Yeah.
my um, what I was missing, I guess,
Yeah.
what I thought I was missing. But yeah, the first semester was very difficult for me. I was not in a great place, mentally, physically either. I mean, I wasn't sleeping well. I wasn't eating well. School was very challenging. It was
Mhm.
also challenging because it was COVID, and
COVID,
like
sure. Yeah.
social dynamics were very odd at that time.
Yes.
So then going into the second semester, I got back. And I was ready to I was like, I'm gonna shed this guy. I'm gonna start fresh, how you do in the new year. And I was like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna focus on school. I'm gonna focus on myself. um and that first night that I got back, or the first few nights I got back, I was actually alone. I was supposed to come back with my friend Emma because we actually
Mhm.
live in the same state.
Mhm.
But she ended up having to delay her travel plans back
Mhm.
for a couple of random reasons. And so I ended up coming back alone.
Yeah.
And the first other person to come back was one of my other guy roommates.
Uh-huh.
Let's call him James.
Okay.
James comes back. And the first night, me and James are talking about what had happened with me in the last semester.
Mhm.
The girlfriend that he had at the time that he was having trouble with. He was, not happy in the relationship for a couple of reasons. Didn't know really what to do about it. He was asking me for my advice, but I didn't really have much to say to him because it seemed like he wasn't very happy. And then a couple of my other friends who didn't live with us came over. We had a couple of drinks and we just kind of hung out in our house and, played games and stuff like that. And then the night came to a close. My friends left. And it was just me and James in the house. And he and I were both big fans of this one show. And I don't remember who it was that suggested we watch it, but one of us did. And so we ended up on our couch watching it. And I wish I could remember better because, truth be told, I was drunk. But
it happens.
Yeah, it happens.
Don't worry about it.
We both were.
Yeah.
But at some point, it became clear to me. I remember thinking that, like, oh, this is kind of weird. Like, what the closeness and like the fact that we're under the same blanket, like it just didn't feel like platonic. And then he actually came out and said, like, are we about to hook up? And I was like, no, like definitely not. And he was like, well, I don't know, like it just seems like that a lot. And he and I had this back and forth. He we talked about his girlfriend. I was like, no, we can't do that. On top of his girlfriend being a barrier was the fact that in my freshman fall, the first semester of my freshman year, my best friend with whom we also lived, Emma, and James had a brief couple week romance, and he had pursued her first, made her feel special. And they had something going that he kind of abruptly cut off. She was very hurt by that. She felt very rejected. Understandably, she was, she liked him and she thought he liked her back as much as she did, and thought that it was going somewhere. And he basically said that it wasn't. And, that was one of my concerns before we decided to move in together. I was like, Emma, do you think that this is a good idea? But she was like, no, like I've moved past that, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, that's fine. But yeah, that was another main reason where I was like, she is not your biggest, she doesn't like you very much. And after we had moved in, it became clear that she and him were not exactly, there was no like beef per se, but there was some awkwardness, a little bit of resentment on her part, which is understandable. She didn't like, being around him a lot, or she got self-conscious about the way he talked to her because he would talk to me more, but that was just because he didn't know how to talk to her because things were awkward. So it was a whole.
They shouldn't have moved in together.
Yeah, that is what.
But when you're in it, you want to act like I get it. I was in my early 20s once too, and I remember always just trying to be like, no, I'm fine with that.
Yes, cool. Exactly. So there was that messiness to it, and I did not want to get caught in the middle of it. I also was really confused because me and James had never had that kind of relationship or any kind of I had never really felt that like attraction to him.
Sure.
If anything, he and I would maybe flirt once in a while, like for fun. And he's kind of a flirty guy. I can be kind of flirty sometimes, but it was never like in a serious way, at least on my part. I was never trying to like, seduce him or something like that.
Of course not.
So that night, flash forward to when he got back, and I was just like, no, I can't do this because of Emma, and also you have a girlfriend. Two very good reasons not to do that. And he was like very persistent, very like tried to like convince me, but in the end, like we both went to bed. The next morning he was at my door and like asking like, do you want to talk about what happened last night? And I was like, I guess so. I mean, it's never going to happen again. Like I said, but he was flirting. He was still like persistent about it. Like, and then for the next couple of days, my roommate started to return and he didn't really lay off, right? Like he kept up with the flattery and the like, and it got just more and more intense, right? Like with time. And he even started to implement it into like, I would get upset about this other guy that I'd had an experience with in the fall. and he would kind of swoop in, find ways to make me feel better about that.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm. Yeah.
he would say things like, "Oh, there's nothing wrong with you. It's him. Like, um, anybody would be lucky to have you. Like, you're a hell of a person. Um, this isn't about you." He would, was constantly trying to flatter me and make me feel desired, and all behind everyone else's back, right? So I
Mhm.
felt like I had this secret that he was like trying to win me over, and I was trying to like kind of resist it. But with time, I started to appreciate the flattery, of course. I was also pretty, like I'd mentioned before, I was pretty vulnerable and I was not in a great place beforehand.
Yeah.
I'd been rejected by this guy that I liked before, and I was really sad about that. I was generally not in a good mental headspace, but this rejection really took a toll on me. And he, I think, kind of he knew exactly what was going on in my mind and knew that like I kind of needed that attention. He
Mhm.
even you're kind of an attention whore, or like
Oh,
things like that. And
yeah. Yeah.
I would laugh them off, but I was like, maybe he's right. Like I am kind of attention seeking, and at the time I thought it was just because I would like was extra inclined to attention, but who doesn't love attention? And I had also been rejected. So I
Yeah,
was
yeah, no, 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 and it doesn't matter what context it is. Calling someone an attention whore is not a healthy observation on
yeah,
anyone.
yeah,
So no, you're good. You're good.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then time a little bit of time passed. There was one night where we actually got pretty drunk with all of
Mm,
my other friends were there, and somehow we ended up in my bedroom. We were talking. I really don't remember the details because I guess I was pretty drunk.
yeah.
And he ended up kissing me.
Mm,
Um, and I think I kissed him back. It was short, and then we didn't. We left the room.
yeah.
Um, Partly because it was a secret, and
Yeah.
also because sorry, my cat's right
It's
there.
okay.
um, and
Hi.
partly because um, we just didn't want to get caught, and I was
Sure.
also mortified and confused and
Yeah.
just really like, what have I just done?
Right.
The next morning I woke up and I felt horrible. I felt
Mm,
so guilty. I felt like I had betrayed my best friend, because I had. And
yeah.
um I was just racked with guilt. I like felt physically sick,
Mhm.
and I was like thinking like about how to tell her, but I also didn't know if I should like
Mhm.
tell her, because I was like, if I never do it again, do I need to hurt her in this way? Like,
Yeah.
it's going to break her heart, and then we have to live with each other for the next 5 months, like, and she
Yeah.
has to know that. So I was really going back and forth in my head. It was really exhausting, and I also didn't have anyone to talk to about it, because I was,
Mhm. Yeah.
I couldn't, besides him, but
Yeah.
he was not
Yeah.
going to give me good advice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then, he also had this girlfriend, and
Yeah.
I felt really confused and weird about that, because I was racked with guilt and I was feeling like horrible, and he didn't seem to feel that same guilt or remorse
Yeah.
that I did
Yeah.
for having wronged someone close to them.
Mhm. Mhm.
And yeah, so that whole day I was like contemplating what to do, into the next day, where also Emma's still not back yet, still just
Mm.
the guys in the house, which is not, you know, helpful, because I was like, wow, how am I going to tell her she like delayed her plans coming back, and in the meantime I've kissed the one guy that she
Yeah.
hates, or that is off limits,
Yeah.
like, so I was really just conflicted.
Yeah.
The next
Yeah.
day, I this whole semester, you'll see I was like kind of spiraling. I was drinking a lot,
Mm.
and there was also not much to do. So we were just drinking
Yeah.
at home with like our mutual friends.
Yeah.
But the next day after kissing him, I was a similar situation. I think we actually gone over to a friend, and then I came home with this guy that doesn't live with me, but was a friend of my roommates. And he was waiting for his ride home when he hears our neighbors who were on the soccer team,
Hmm.
you know, like drinking, playing games. He was like, let's invite them in. Let's be friendly. And I was drunk and in no mood really to make friends with people,
Yeah. Yeah.
but he invites them in.
Yeah.
These two guys come in. And then my friend, the one that had walked with me, his ride comes. So all of a sudden I'm alone in my house with these two guys, these neighbors,
Oh boy. Yeah.
who are also drunk.
Mm.
And then the rest of my roommates get home and are like horrified, including James.
Mm.
They're like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
Um, and by that point we had like been drinking and whatever. And James and my other friend, Nate, we'll call him,
Okay.
who is still a good friend of mine to this day, actually. He and James were trying to figure out ways to kick these guys out of the house, just
Yeah.
like it's time to go home. Somehow I was talking to the one of the older ones. There were two guys. One of them
Hmm.
was 2 years older than me.
Okay.
And he was very, very drunk. He was flirting with me and I was probably flirting back. And
Hmm.
I don't know, I made some reference to something and he was like, no, I don't believe you. And I was like, oh, I'll go in my room and I'll get it and show you. I don't remember what it was, but there was
Right.
some piece of evidence that he didn't believe I had or something. So I
Right.
go up to my room and I was planning to come back down, but instead he follows me up to my room
Oh.
and he like kisses me and I was really thrown off by that. And
Hmm.
then he, comes back. He's like, we should probably go back down. And we go back down.
Hmm.
These two guys get kicked out. I'm talking to like James and Nate about what just happened. And then this other guy, who had followed me up to my room, shows back up at the door and is like
Oh
drunkenly
no.
knocking on our door saying
Yeah.
like, no, I just want to say goodbye to her. Just like, let me talk to her for 1 second, like blah, blah, blah. And so
Oh
James
god.
and Nate have to like be like, no, go
Get rid
home.
of
Like,
him. Yeah.
what are you doing? Like,
Yeah.
but it was very unsettling to me.
Of
It freaked
course.
me out a lot.
Yeah.
And they got him to leave,
Mm.
but I was like very shaken.
Sure.
My friend Nate ended up going to bed and James and I were just sitting there. And then James was like comforting me.
Hmm.
Um, and he was like, do you want to go talk upstairs in my room? And so I ended up going up there and I say all
Hmm.
these things. I'm trying not to like insert my own self judgment into them, but of
It's
course,
hard.
it's
It's hard.
hard. It's
It's
like,
hard.
um, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done several things, but I go up there. He and I are talking. I was very drunk. I don't
Yeah.
really remember like how we ended up on top of his bed or
Hmm.
like kissing, but
Hmm.
we did. And then I
Yeah.
remember him asking if he wanted to, if I wanted to have sex with him.
Yeah.
Um, and I said yes.
Hmm.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
I said yes. I think I was pretty sad
Hmm.
and wanted to feel like some kind of comfort,
Yeah.
which is not how you get comfort, but
It's not,
nonetheless,
but I understand why you felt that way at that
yeah,
time and why you said yes. It makes sense. It makes
yeah.
sense. Yeah.
So I said yes. We ended up having sex. The first truly weird thing that I should have known from the jump was that the first time we had sex, he was on top of me and he slapped me hard across the face,
Oh no.
which
Okay.
isn't there's nothing objectively wrong with doing that as long as there's two consenting adults,
Correct. Yeah.
and like some ground rules about boundaries. But
Yeah.
um I was just like, whoa, like what the fuck are you doing? And
Right.
I think I even laughed.
Right.
He was like, I'm sorry, I just got like excited. And I was like, okay, that hurt, like don't
Yeah.
do that.
Right.
And also I was
Good.
kind of like freaked out. I was like, this is the first time we've had sex. Like, why did you think that would be a good idea? Yeah. But I tried to like, you know, brush it under the rug, and I ended up, I don't know, we ended up having sex. I think we talked for a long time. He gave me, even more uh attention, like so many compliments. Oh my God, like how beautiful I was, um how amazing I was in bed, which like at the time was something I was kind of insecure about. I was also insecure about my appearance. And I think he knew both of these things. He also like was like, wow, you just understand me like, so well. Like I feel like I could talk to you forever. Like we could stay up talking till like 7 a.m. and never get tired of it. And I have to admit that like I kind of felt I was smitten by that. Like
Sure.
I was like, wow, someone actually likes me for me, because I had just been rejected. And I thought it was, because the previous guy really just didn't like my personality. I was just not, this previous guy had told me I was too hardened, there's something about me inherently that he couldn't be with. And so all of a sudden this other guy is telling me like all those things were actually like good qualities. And I walked away from that feeling horrible about what I had done, also kind of like numb to it, because I was like, that just couldn't even, like, I couldn't possibly have just done that. Like, how could I even do that? And then also a little smitten, because I was like, wow, like someone could actually like me. Like at that point in my life, I'd never experienced a guy having feelings for me, at least to my knowledge. And so it was like kind of exciting.
Sure.
And I tried, like, after that happened, I was like, James, this is never happening again. Like, I was like so ashamed of myself. I was like, I feel like I should just not tell Emma. It will break her heart and destroy her. And then she'll have to live here, and it'll just be like so upsetting. And like, and I just racked with guilt. I was literally trying to drink away my existence. Like, at that point in my life, I was like, wow, like, life can't be real because of how fucked up the situation is that I'm in.
Sure.
Like, it's just not possible, So the semester goes on. I'm like trying to resist like his advances, because also after this happens, he's like, laying it on thicker and thicker and thicker. More compliments when I'm in the kitchen and he's there and no one else is. It's like, he's like close to me, he's like touching me, he's giving me all kinds of attention. And while I didn't say stop, I need you to like, because to be honest, part of me enjoyed it, part of me like relished in it. I also wasn't like I was kind of letting it happen, not because I didn't have control over it, but just because I was it was almost like I was paralyzed. I didn't know what to do. Like, I wanted to stop it, but I also knew it made me feel good in the short term, even though it made me feel like shit in the long term.
I get it. I get it. Yeah.
So, this continues. My friend Emma gets back, and then things start to get really, really bad from here, because he then starts to become a little bit possessive and jealous. So, we lived with guys who had other guy friends. They would come over all the time. If he saw me talking to someone for a long time, he'd be like, what the fuck are you doing? Or why are you like talking to this person? Or like, he would give me some kind of like sarcastic comments, like, of course, like, or he would, say things like, if I was hanging out with Emma, already feeling like horribly guilty because she doesn't, at this point, I was having kind of an identity crisis, because I was like, wow, no one knows who I am. No one knows what I've been capable of. And this was still a secret. And he wanted it kept a secret too, because otherwise people would know that he had been cheating on his girlfriend at the time.
Of course. I mean, it's red flags all over the place. Yeah.
So, he, but he still like kind of put me in this horrible position where he was like, well, I'm going to be mad at you if you act normal. Like, if you act like you're talking to like other guys like you would, or like not even flirting with other guys, just
Right.
being friendly
Yeah.
or like hanging out with Emma, right? Like
Right.
he would text me and I'd have to like hide things. And like he was constantly like calling me and she'd be like, why is he calling you? Like, and that would start a fight with me and her. And
Yeah.
then I would have to lie to her, which I hated doing and I was already doing a lot of. And
Yeah.
he knew that. And so I tried to end things
Yeah. What a
several times.
manipulator. What a
Yeah.
manipulator. Yeah. Yeah.
So I tried to end things several times in that semester. It didn't really
Yeah.
work.
Mhm. Mhm.
I tried doing it, but like I was also living with him, so
Yeah.
it wasn't like I could really escape his physical presence, at least. And
Mhm.
I wasn't. Nobody knew about this, so it wasn't like I could. And as badly as I wanted to tell my friend Nate, but I knew I didn't want to burden anyone else with the information.
Yeah. You couldn't
Um,
talk to you were alone. You couldn't talk to anyone. I
yeah,
get it. Yeah.
yeah. So, and he would also he would yell at me when he saw me talking to some other guy, which would also cause a
Uh,
scene. And then I would have to like be like, people can see us. Like, you're not
yeah.
supposed to be. Why would you be yelling at me? He would get visibly jealous in front
Mhm.
of other people,
Mhm.
which I
Yep.
would have to explain away somehow.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and it made no sense to like some people. Like, it was very. I was constantly like anxious that people
Yeah.
were going to figure it out or
Yeah.
like be
And yet it
aware.
was
And then I was
all
also
your fault. And yet it was all your fault. I
yes,
mean, yeah. Yeah.
yes. And then
Yeah.
I was also anxious that I was pissing him off because
Mhm.
I was so conscious of my behavior all the time. He was like, "Yeah, I literally thought you were gonna go upstairs with that guy." And I was
Mhm.
drinking a lot, so I was not like 100% clear on everything I'd done every time I
Yeah.
socialized. And like I would run it by Nate and be like, "No, I didn't think that." Like, and then I would say go back to him and say like, "Well, like I didn't apparently that's not what it was like." He's like, "No, I'm telling you, like that's what happened. Like you were
Mhm.
all over him, blah, blah, blah." So it was just very difficult.
Yeah.
And at the same time, he's still like doing the love bombing, right? Like when he says like, when he would get jealous, he'd be like, "I'm sorry, it's just because like I like you so much and like I care about you, or like I wish I could be with you." He made
Mhm.
it seem like I was the one standing in the way, or like my friendship with Emma was the thing standing in the way of like us
Oh,
being together. And I didn't even really want to be with him, to be
right.
honest, at that point. Like I was just so lost and I
Yeah.
didn't even want to be, you know, in I just didn't want to be in the position that I was in, but
Yeah.
I was stuck where I was. It was a
Yeah.
horrible place to be.
Yeah.
And he eventually said I love you
Mhm.
very
Yeah.
early on, about like
Oh,
a
yeah.
month into like this whole situation began. And I was like,
No. No, no,
um, I didn't
yeah.
obviously say it back.
Good. I'm glad you didn't. Yeah. Because it's
But
always
like,
so hard when someone says it
yeah,
to you, you feel like, "Oh, I kinda have to say it back, right?" Yeah.
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 Um, And then like a month or so goes by where this is kind of like on and off, and I'm just trying to like, you know, deal with the situation, manage it, but also like stewing in my own self-loathing, right? And guilt
Yeah.
and um like identity crisis. And March comes around, so we're about halfway through the semester, and there's this increasing pressure for me now to show to him how much I care about him.
Mhm.
Um including like saying like that I love him, and I
Uh-huh.
didn't love him, and
No.
I I didn't feel it. And I also never said that to anybody.
Mhm.
So it's kind of
Mhm.
a big deal for me, which I explained to him, and he was like, well, this is like just an example, like I care about you so much more than you care about me. um like it's just obvious, blah 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 blah. And he was like, yeah, I mean, if you didn't like, you should like, if you didn't have Emma, like he almost pitted himself against her in certain ways. And so, and I just didn't know what to say to that. And I didn't even know why I was being put in this position in the first place. It was like I had suddenly ended up in this spot and I didn't even know how I got there,
Yeah.
how I
Yeah.
fell so deep so fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then he actually tore his ACL playing pickup basketball.
Oh, boy.
And
Oh, dear.
he had to go home.
Uh-huh.
Um, for the rest of the semester because he figured it would just be easier to be at home, to have the surgery at home where his parents could, look after him and stuff,
Mhm.
especially since classes were online.
Yeah.
So he ends up going home for the rest of the semester,
Okay.
which I was sad about because
Yeah.
he was the one who was providing me with like constant like affection and like
Yeah.
in a weird, even though I hated the secret, it was like I felt like he was the only person who actually knew who I was,
Mhm. Mhm.
because of this secret. And
Yeah.
I was like, wow, now I'm truly alone.
Yeah.
Um, and, I just felt like kind of lost there.
Mhm.
But he demanded, my attention nonetheless. He would call me
Mhm.
multiple times a day,
Oh boy.
which was difficult because I would be like out and about doing things. And when
Yep.
I wouldn't answer, I'd be like, well, I can call you back later. And he was like, you never like talk to me anymore. And I'm like, and I would be like, well, that's not true because it wasn't. And I also like, I'm like, well, I have, my
You have
own
a
life.
you have a
And
life to live.
yeah. And it was honestly
Yeah.
like having like a long distance boyfriend, but
Mhm.
not who wasn't my boyfriend and who was
Right.
also a secret. So
Yeah,
it
yeah,
was very
exactly.
difficult. So it was very difficult to manage,
Yeah,
like
of
nearly
course.
impossible,
Mhm.
extremely stressful.
Yeah.
Um, but I didn't like forget about him. I still cared about him. I still
Mhm.
like talking to him and I like still had feelings for him.
Mhm.
I didn't love him,
Mhm.
but before he left, he actually kind of, and you can't force someone to say that they love you, but he kind of just nagged me about it so much that I ended up saying it,
Yeah,
which kind
yeah,
of haunts me because it's the first time I ever said it to somebody and I
yeah.
don't even think I meant it.
I'm sure you didn't.
Um, and yeah, so then, he
Yeah,
was away. I was still at school, living my
yeah,
life. I mean, I
yeah.
was still like doing things. And then this other guy comes along and expresses interest in me. He
Mhm.
happens to know James.
Mm.
They're not in the same friend group, but they are in a similar circle. And I kind of liked talking to this guy. He was like nice to me. It was interesting. It was like
Yeah,
a nice change. And I wasn't like, wasn't really thinking deeply into it, but like this guy ended up at the very end of the semester ends up asking me to go to a formal with him, and
mhm.
James finds out through like some
Mm.
mutual friends, and he's like, well, you're not going to hook up with him, are you? And I was like, no, but I didn't know if I was. I just I didn't really think about it, and I didn't really want the restriction not to, but because I was attracted to him, but I was also like, oh, I guess I shouldn't because he's friends with James. Um, and so I was like, okay, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. But then I felt bad because I felt like I'd been leading this guy on. And I ended up going to the formal. I had a great time, actually. I had a
Great.
blast.
Wonderful.
And I was with this guy the whole time. We had a lot of fun. I
Mhm.
was thinking about James a lot. I think I drank a lot because I was trying not to be anxious about James because I knew he knew what was going on.
Yeah, and you shouldn't have even had that
Yeah. I
in
mean,
your brain to think about, but yeah.
it's also ironic because he had a girlfriend.
Yeah,
So he was in no position to ask me about anything having to do with my love life because he had one
exactly.
of his own
The fact that he
already.
was putting restrictions on what you did at the formal, he was completely out of line.
Yeah.
Completely out of
So
line. Yeah.
yeah. So then um I I ended up actually hooking up with this guy.
Mhm.
We like made out. We didn't have
Yeah.
sex, but we
Mhm.
like, you know, hooked up, and I knew immediately I was going to have to tell James, and I was sick to my stomach about it because I knew he was going to be livid with me. And then he actually ended up finding out from other people before I could even tell him, or like
Yeah.
he asked people who were there, or like his mutual friends, like, does it look like Emily and so are going to hook up? People were like, yeah, why? Why are you
Yeah.
asking?
Yeah.
And he was so mad and so like out of his emotions were so out of his control that he ended up like spilling the whole thing to like a couple of people,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
which was really anxiety inducing for
Sure,
me.
sure. Yeah.
Um, And the fallout of that was basically I had to tell him. He said some like horrible things. He basically said like that, I don't get why you would do this. Like, obviously, you don't care about me. Like, I literally told you, like, this is the exact thing I told you not to do.
He's in no position
He,
to order you around.
yeah, he said, you knew I would find out. I would literally only do this to you if I knew my girlfriend was going to find out. You could have fucked 3 guys in some other fraternity and I wouldn't have cared. I did my thing with you under the assumption my girlfriend wouldn't know, and you knew it. You did it knowing I was going to be hurt. And
Everyone
then,
always finds out about everything. That's the thing.
yeah,
The fact that he thought that he could get away with all of this, just no. Everyone
yeah,
always finds out.
yeah. And then he was
Yeah.
like talking to me about how he was like, I was like, I ended up apologizing profusely to him. I
Ugh,
like
sorry.
so many, like so much stuff. I said to him like which, yeah. And then he was like, I think you would. Then he started just lashing out. He was like, I think you would definitely cheat on a boyfriend, 99% chance, no matter who you're with. Just think about it. Like, the Emma situation is probably worse than cheating. So from a moral standpoint, that would probably be pretty easy for you. And like things like that, where he was just coming at me and like saying, and I ended up saying like, okay, I think we should just not speak for the summer. So we
Good.
didn't.
Good.
Basically things stopped for the summer and I was pretty happy about that. I did miss him, but we get back and things kind of pick up from where they left off, except even worse. The secret continues. I try so hard to like extricate myself from his life, and we're
Yeah.
not living together anymore. Me and Emma moved out of the house into
Yeah.
a house with her girlfriends, but
Uh-huh.
he's still like demanding my constant attention. He still yells at me when he sees me talking to pretty much any guy. And this goes on for months and months and months. And I try to end it
Yeah.
several times.
Yeah. Sure.
Like, just to, save myself. Cause at this point I'd become very, very mentally ill. It was like I was trying so hard to like, manage my life, and it was just not, everything was just driving me like I don't want to say driving me crazy, but it was like it was very, very difficult to like
Yeah.
manage. Like, I would wake up on days and be like, I cannot believe this is my life, and not in like the exciting way that people say.
No, of course. I mean, he's not letting you live a life. He's not letting you live your life on your terms.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so then eventually he does break up with his girlfriend, not because I asked him to, or not because anyone asks him to.
Right.
Um, and
I hope she just got tired of his bullshit.
yeah, honestly, that was probably, I think they'd been fighting for a while.
Yeah.
He tells my good friend Nate, which he didn't run by me. I was terrified when he told me that, because I thought Nate would. That was also another thing, is that when I was like, now I don't even know what to do, because this secret has been kept for so long. Like, if I tell people now, like, I'm going to lose all my friends. Like, no one is going to speak to me ever again. Like, everyone will know I'm this horrible person. Like, who does that to their best friend?
I just hate that. I mean, and what you're saying is so common, and the fact that the victim is the one who has to live in fear that they're going to lose all their friends, when in fact you didn't do anything wrong here. I'm just putting that out there for you.
That's something, yeah. I mean, that's something I think I'm still struggling to deal with, because I take ownership of the fact that I entered into a relationship with him. Like,
I get that. Yeah, of course. Of course.
He didn't force me to do that, and like, I continued to entertain him. I could have at some point tried harder to pull myself out of that, to like, I don't know, talk to somebody about.
But that's the case with a lot of people in these situations that I'm learning from hosting this podcast, from my own experience. I could have left Rolling Stone sooner, but I didn't.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to say like, stop blaming yourself. Stop saying blah, blah, blah. I understand why you're going through all of those thought patterns is what I'm
Mhm.
saying.
Yeah, no, it was definitely like very hard. And I knew that
Mhm.
like I was just in this like horrible situation. And he ended up telling Nate, and I was so terrified because I thought Nate would disown me as a friend. And to my shock, and honestly, this was probably the best thing that could have happened during the
Mhm.
situations, that as Nate was actually very supportive, not supportive of the situation and not supportive of like what was going on, but was
Right.
very
But of
like
you.
helpful to me. Yes.
Good.
And
Nate's a
wasn't,
good one. Nate's a
yeah,
good
no, he is a
He's a
good
good
one.
one. He's a good
That's
one.
why I said we're still
Yes,
friends to this day.
exactly.
Um, and he was, very helpful to me. He wasn't, he wasn't judgmental. He didn't, make me feel guiltier than I already. He knew I felt extremely guilty and horrible about
Mhm.
everything, so he
Mhm.
didn't pile on. Is basically what I'm saying. And
Yeah.
it got to the point where like Nate, like this is like already February of my junior year at this
Mhm.
point.
Yeah.
So this has been going on for like more than a year on and
Yeah,
off,
exactly.
which is like taking its toll.
Sure.
Like I was losing a lot of weight. I was really,
Mhm.
really depressed. I was
Mhm.
really anxious. I was
Yeah.
like socially withdrawn, like from
Yeah.
my housemates, like
Right.
in the way that like I just didn't like even who I was. I was like
Mhm.
not, didn't want to be around people,
Yeah. I
because I
get it.
felt like they didn't know who I was.
Mhm. Mhm.
The only
Sure.
person I felt like comfortable around was Nate,
Yeah.
honestly, and
Okay.
James, because well, when James was in his good moods,
Yeah, I
because
get that.
when he wasn't in his good moods, it was, he would shout, he would slam the, like slam or pound the walls, he would
Mhm.
throw things at the
Yeah.
wall.
Yeah.
He would, call me names. He accused me of being slutty a lot of the time, or dressing slutty, or like my
Yep.
behavior was inappropriate with men. I was also very insecure about the fact that I'd, during my freshman sophomore year had hooked up with a few guys who were in the same friend group or who I
Mhm.
had been friends with, and he threw that back in my face many times, like, oh, you don't know how to set boundaries, or like you've never set boundaries between friends and who like you're fucking. So like guys, the way you act is like guys are just going to see that and interpret it as you being like, you know,
Yeah.
flirting with them or like wanting to sleep with them, which wasn't the case.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it really got in my head. It made me feel like I wasn't in control of the way that other people saw me, and I
Mhm.
was in control of my own actions, which I already kind of felt like because of this whole situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the only person I really felt comfortable with was Nate, and I talked to him about this a lot, and
Uh-huh.
he was very much there for me. I don't know what I would have done without him, truly.
Thank you,
Um,
Nate.
but it got to the point where I was like so sick,
Yeah.
that I had to like tell Emma. I had to
Mhm.
come clean about everything.
Mhm.
And because I had tried to end it with James so many times, and every
Yeah.
time I went back, and I
Mhm.
hated myself for it so, so, so deeply. But I also had I had no one. I felt so alone in the world. And he was the only person who, it was like the shittier I felt about the situation and the shittier he made me feel, the more I craved that
Mhm.
like
Mhm. Mhm.
forgiveness and that love from him. Right. 'Cause he was the
Absolutely.
only person who had ever said he loved me, or had
Yeah.
ever said I was beautiful, or whoever said that like they appreciated what I had to say. And
They're
I just felt,
very powerful words.
yes.
Very powerful words. Sure.
So I was just, I felt very helpless and very out
Mhm.
of control. And I ended
Yeah.
up telling her, and she was distraught, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
She could not believe I had done this. And
Mhm.
I tried to explain to her that I loved him,
Mhm.
and that, I couldn't control the fact that I started to catch feelings for him. And she was like, well, why didn't you talk to somebody? Lots of things.
Yeah.
We had gone back and forth many times about
Yeah.
it. And she was like, well, why did you go back to him all these times? Like, if you truly cared about my feelings, you never would have even opened your heart to him. And the truth be told, I didn't have answers to give to her, because I myself didn't know how to answer these questions. I mean, like, all I could say was that I loved him, and that I couldn't control how I felt. And that
Yeah.
the lie was horrible, and that I regret it, and I should have told her right away, but that I couldn't help but feel that she would. I just was so afraid to tell her because I knew it would hurt her, which is the truth.
Of course, yeah.
Um,
And I
and
commend you for telling the truth eventually.
yeah, it was hard. I mean,
Of course.
it was a little too late,
Yeah,
14
but
months too late,
I know. I know. Well,
um,
no.
but yeah, I
But
did
you
it.
still did it, and that's important. I mean, I
Yeah,
know that it still hurt Emma, but some people go all their lives without coming clean, but you did. So there's
yeah,
really something to be said about that.
yeah. Thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate that.
Sure.
Yeah. So after that, I was, prepared to lose her as a
Yeah.
friend, and I did.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it was
Yeah.
really sad for me for a long
Yeah.
time.
I'm sorry.
We also had to live together still, which was
That's
tough.
rough. Yeah.
And I was still stuck with James,
Mhm.
and at that point I was like, well, I have nothing.
Mhm.
Um, I had some of my other friends who didn't abandon me. It wasn't
Mhm.
as horrible of a reality as I imagined. People definitely found out about it and judged me for it, but
Yeah.
I didn't get to, and I lost some friends for
Yeah.
sure over it.
Yeah.
Not just Emma, but other people.
Yeah.
But I was like, well, I went through all of this, and I still stuck with this person.
Mm.
So I ended up deciding, like, well, I guess we decided together, like, to give it a shot.
Mhm.
And that is what I think I'm most ashamed of, is because I had all of the, like, information before even
Yeah.
signing on for any kind of commitment, because I knew exactly how he treated me.
Mhm.
Um, but I was just so vulnerable and so unhappy and so, like, in such a bad place that I was like, no, this is what's best. This is the
Mhm.
best that situation that can come out of, or this is the best outcome that can come out of the situation.
Yeah.
Um, and so we started dating, which was, we had some good moments for a while. At the beginning, it was kind of like this euphoric, like, wow, we don't have to be in secret anymore. Like,
Yeah.
but there were nonetheless, like, moments all the time, right? That, um, he was very difficult. Like, for example, the first formal after I told her, which was at the very end of the year,
Mhm.
I took my friend Nate to be sensitive because I
Mhm.
didn't want to, like, put it in her face. I just took him as a friend, and he basically, flipped his shit on me. He was very unhappy about that. He was not jealous of Nate, but just jealous of the fact that I was, or mad that I wasn't taking him. And I
Yeah.
told him it was to be sensitive. Um, he was also never really sensitive to the fact that I wanted to be sensitive to her feelings as much as I possibly could, since I'd hurt her so much. I mean, that's the least I can do, right? He didn't ever, like, make that easy for me. Um, when I was trying to make amends with her, like, many times, he was, like, kind of averse to that. He didn't like that I was trying to do that. Um, he didn't like the relationships I had with other guys, like, if I was friends with them. Nate was pretty much the only one he was okay with, because he and Nate were friends, and also Nate has this long-term girlfriend, and Nate and I had been friends since freshman year, and we're good friends. And so he kind of, and even with Nate, he would get jealous,
Mhm.
occasionally.
Yeah, I mean, I that doesn't surprise me. Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, like, there were many times in the relationship where he pushed me to my limit when I was having, I dealt with a lot of mental health struggles, partly because of the situation and also because
Yeah.
of just, who I am.
You're
And
a human being. Yeah.
yeah, and he would, instead of, like, he would make me feel, um, not like a burden, like, wow, I can't believe, like, why don't you just get over it? Sometimes he would say, like, he would try to kind of fix the problem with, like, doing exercise, which sometimes is very helpful, but other
Sure.
times, but is not a end all be all,
No,
like,
it's not a cure-all.
for
Yeah,
anything.
right.
Um, and he tried to, he didn't want to talk about it. My cat's here.
So
Um,
cute.
I know, she's cute. Um, he would, when I would get upset about things and would talk about, you know, things that were like talk very negatively about myself, he would, instead of like, and I know that it's difficult to respond to someone in this way because I've also been in this position,
Mhm.
but instead of like trying to be supportive, to listen, to comfort me, to like respond calmly, he would just get frustrated. He'd be like, I just can't deal with this. This is when he would like throw things or
Oh,
like
yeah, yeah.
yell or like
Yeah.
storm out of the room or like slam doors and things like that. And that would just make me feel worse because I knew I was causing him like stress and I felt like a burden.
Yeah.
And I'd also been up at this, like I had been sexually assaulted.
Oh my God.
And that was something that I talked about with him and
Okay.
was difficult to broach with him because
Sure.
he was not very, um, he wasn't willing, he didn't want to talk about it really. I would like say, mention things to him, or I would try to explain things to him that might be triggering, and I'd be like, well, we need to talk about why that is, right? Like, and
Right.
he'd be like,
Yeah.
he would just be like, well, can we just never talk about it again? And I would be like, well, I kind of sometimes need to talk about it, or
Yeah.
like I would at least feel like I would at least like to be able to feel like I could if I needed
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm sorry that you went through that. Yeah. I
Thank
mean,
you. It's
I know
okay.
it's
Well, it's not
separate,
it's
but
not okay,
yeah.
but
Yeah. I mean, it's not
um,
okay, but
but
I'm
yes.
sorry that you went through that and that he wouldn't even let you bring it into conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, because there were moments in our relationship where I felt very randomly upset about certain things,
Mhm.
I think having to do with that. And
Mhm.
he, instead of like trying to understand or at least listen to why that was, he would just get angry and frustrated. And
Yeah.
it made me feel very wrong. It made me feel like I was causing some kind of problem in our relationship or inconvenience to him, stress,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm not excusing his reaction, but one thing I've learned from being in very similar situations is that the person tends to react like that if they just literally don't have any tools to respond to it and they just
mhm.
don't know what to say. Again, not saying it's right because it isn't.
No, yeah. I knew that was part of I knew that
Yeah.
too. And it was like, that was a hard part because I was like, I feel like I need to be with someone who, you know, is like equipped or not even equipped, but like at least is willing to try. And that was another
Yeah.
thing is that this would come up multiple times. And he, there are some certain ways to educate yourself. It's
Mhm.
hard, and it's not like fun and it's scary, but I
Right.
would talk to him about it and but he didn't ever really put in that work. And
Yeah.
um yeah, I mean, the last anecdote I guess I could give about like what he was like was,
Yeah.
this was actually towards the end of my senior year of college, so not that long ago.
Okay.
Um, was at a formal.
Yeah.
I had taken him. He had beforehand expressed that he did not want to go. It was on a
Mhm.
Sunday night. He was like, "It's just so stressful for me." Like, like, and I was like, "Well, you don't have to go. Like, I can bring someone else as a friend." And he was like, "No, no, I'm going." Like,
Mhm.
but then it made it like he honestly didn't give me really an option because he was like, I'm like so not excited to go, but then you're
Yeah.
not allowed to take someone else. I was like, well, I don't want to force you. So it was kind of off to a rough start, and
Sure.
then I was not feeling good about it. I was not excited. I was very unhappy. Up until this point, my friends thought like our relationship was like all rainbows and butterflies. Also, like they didn't know about any of the his behaviors or his tendencies.
Yeah.
But when we were at this formal, a guy friend of mine came up to me to say hello and hugged me
Mhm.
pretty tightly and kind of close to the waist and
Mhm.
whispered something to me actually about someone else. It was
Yeah.
some joke about how he was going to outdrink someone or something stupid.
Yeah.
Um, and James was right there beside
Mhm.
me and he absolutely flipped and
Ugh.
was like, he grabs my arm. He's like, "Are you kidding me?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he was like, "I literally thought you guys were gonna kiss." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" Like, no, I was never gonna kiss him. He just came up to say hi and to say this thing about so and so, and he was like, "Okay, but I'm sorry. Like, did you see the way that he grabbed you? Like, it was like 20 seconds, and I literally thought he was gonna kiss you." And I was like, "Okay, well, I'm sorry. I wasn't gonna kiss him." And
Yeah.
he was like, "Why didn't you pull away? Like, do you realize how like that's so inappropriate?" And I was like, "It was just a hug. Like, I didn't think it was inappropriate." So it ended up like in this huge fight,
Mhm.
literally right in the middle of our formal
Mm,
on the dance floor.
yeah.
And eventually, like my friend, we'll call her Anna, she comes up and she realizes that there's something wrong, and she
Yeah.
pulls me away and she takes me into the bathroom. And this was the moment, like this was kind of the reckoning where I
Yeah.
guess I just like couldn't take it anymore, and I pretty much just lost it and spilled everything to her.
How did
And
that
she
feel?
realized, yeah,
Feel
well,
that feel me? How did that feel for you?
it was, frightening when I first started talking,
Yeah.
but then after it kind of just like all fell out of me, like,
Yeah.
and it did feel kind of like relieving and like a weight off my
Good.
chest.
Yeah.
It was like I was like, oh, it's not a horrible thing, to be honest. Because the thing that still eats at me, and that will probably for a long time, and back then was even worse, is that, I know this is like warped logic, but in my head it's like, wow, I gave up, or I jeopardized my relationship with my best friend at the time for this guy who doesn't even treat me well.
Mhm.
And there's like there's a lot of shame associated with that, and I never knew how to come clean about that to people.
Mhm. Mhm.
um
Yeah, of course.
so telling Anna about this was for the first time was like, just like, I finally like felt like I could breathe again a little
Mhm.
bit. And she
Yeah.
was great about it. Obviously, she's also a great friend to me.
Thank you, Anna.
And so after that, she kept me away from him the rest of the night. She ended up
Good.
taking me home. I almost broke up with him the next day. I
Uh-huh.
ended up not breaking up with him because I asked for space, and he was like, "We're either breaking up or there's no such like,
Yeah.
and but at that point I knew I wanted to, and that was the first time where I felt like I could move on
Good for
from
you.
it, from the whole situation.
Yeah.
And then like a couple months later I finally left and said like, and I kind of regret the way I did it, because I don't think I was honest enough about, I was definitely honest in that like he and I had hundreds of conversations about how he treated me and how I was not okay with it and how he made me feel. um
Yeah.
and then somehow I'd end up apologizing after every single one. So
Of course.
when I finally broke up with him, I kind of just took the approach that like I was like, I'm not in the place to be in a relationship right now, regardless of who it is.
Hey, whatever works. You had tried so many other times.
Yeah. And it was not even easy this time. I mean, he tried to convince me
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
to do it, to stay together, that we loved each other. He told me that no one else was going to love me more. He said I was
Mhm.
going to look back on this and regret it. He said,
Mhm.
like, he was going to try for me like he always had
Mhm.
said. And it was just, yeah. But, you know, I'm still working on processing all of that. I've actually never told anyone the whole, like, story. So this is my first time, but I
Thank
think
you
like,
so much. I'm honored
thank
that
you.
that you told me the whole story and that you've shared it on this podcast, and I know it is going to help other listeners. And I just realized that I'm banging my bracelets on the table. I'm sorry
Yeah.
about that.
No, it's okay.
So, I would just love to give you an opportunity to give some final thoughts. I know, like you said, you're still processing what you've been through, but for people who are out there who are looking for support, do you have any, I won't put pressure on you and say words of wisdom, but any insights from your experiences that you would like to share?
I think that, um, I think the thing that I struggle with and have struggled with the most is like this validation, right? That I,
Mhm.
like being on this podcast and like saying like the word emotional or the words emotional abuse is still something that feels kind of weird to me.
I get that.
But is like
Totally.
slowly becoming, I'm feeling more and more okay with it. And I think part of that is like talking as much as you possibly can to your supportive and like non-judgmental friends. The support system that you have is really, really important. I'm also in therapy, and that has been
Good.
tremendously helpful.
Good.
Not even just to talk about this, but to talk about little things, right? To talk
Yeah.
about how you felt in certain moments, about certain fights that you have stuck with you, or like not even fights, but moments that have stuck with you. The reasons why you did things, right? Because a lot of the things that I've done, I find it hard to explain to
Yep.
myself and to others. But when you finally do and talk to someone and you can hear that they kind of understand why you might have done something that you did or why you felt the way that you did, it's
Absolutely.
can be tremendously validating. And
Yes. We love
um,
therapy on this podcast.
yes.
We love therapy because I am not a therapist. So I am always quick to remind people to please seek out professional help. So I'm so glad that you are doing so. I know it took a long time, but I applaud you for getting out of the relationship. And it sounds to me that you have a very bright future ahead of you. So I just want to thank you again so much for coming on the podcast and for sharing your story with me.
Thank you so much.
My Thank you for listening to my conversation with Emily on Emotional Abuse is Real. If you would like to share your own emotional abuse story here on the podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out at hello@sereneleadsrights.com or through Instagram at sereneleadsrights. Please note that this podcast should not be used as a substitute for professional mental health services. If you are a victim of emotional abuse and need help, please call or text the Suicide and Crisis Hotline at 988. Or call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. You can also text START, START, to 88788. Once again, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Follow me on Instagram. Go grab my free download, 10 Things I Learned from Getting Paid to Watch TV. And if you can, please support us through our Buy Me a Coffee page. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.